In the decade following the publication of A Nation at Risk, its findings went largely unchallenged, and therefore education reforms were predicated on the highly suspect findings of that report and fueled by its alarmist tone. Government officials routinely hearkened to A Nation at Risk in their public pronouncements of a failing public school system and the need for systemic reform. What if, however, a government report surfaced that called into question the validity of the findings of A Nation at Risk? It was one thing for radical liberal university professors to challenge the notion that the schools were failing and publish articles that would only be read by intellectuals and policy analysts in academic journals. It was another thing entirely for the U.S. government to issue a report that challenged the findings issued by the Department of Education in 1983. In 1990, Admiral James Watkins, the Department of Energy Secretary, instructed Sandia National Laboratories to undertake a study of American education. Watkins was a protege of Admiral Hyman Rickover, who was a staunch critic of America's public schools. As you recall, the opening incendiary paragraph in A Nation at Risk refers to the supposed gains made in education achievement in the wake of the Sputnik Challenge. As a reminder, the Sputnik Challenge refers to the national shock associated with the October 4th, 1957 launch of the world's first satellite by the Soviet Union. What ensued was a crisis moment that the United States had been defeated in the scientific arena by the Soviet Union. In fact, to punctuate this moment of crisis, Life magazine published an exposé in March 1958 comparing the education received by high school students in the Soviet Union and those in the United States. According to the magazine article, Soviet students received a rigorous education, and U.S. students received an almost ridiculously shallow education. Admiral Rickover would use this defeat to vigorously attack public schools, testifying before Congress and writing books about the failure of American education. Interestingly, some of the assertions and recommendations of the National Commission on Excellence in Education, published in A Nation at Risk, are almost identical to those cited by Rickover 2 decades earlier. The question is, why did we need the NCEE in 1983 if the American public had already been inundated with the crisis that supposedly existed in American education in the late 1950s? I think the answer to that question is that what was needed was a federal Department of Education in order to truly get the attention of the American public and to provide a framework and governmental mechanism to implement the reforms that Rickover felt were needed to maintain international military superiority. That would make sense when you consider the alarmist military rhetoric employed by A Nation at Risk. In 1990, when Admiral James Watkins, the Department of Energy Secretary, charged the Sandia National Laboratories to investigate the status of education, he was following in what now was a continuing effort to increase the amount and quality of science and mathematics instruction in U.S. schools. Watkins proclaimed, "We have to pick up our society by its bootstraps and find a new mechanism to obtain science and mathematics literacy." Sandia National Laboratories seemed like the perfect entity to undertake an investigation into public schools, with its long history as a federally funded research center. Most likely, what would have resulted from the investigation, it was thought at the time, would be a series of instructional activities that could be implemented in schools to promote science and mathematics literacy. The Sandia researchers completed their study and produced their report in spring 1991. This initial report was originally titled Perspectives on Education in America. It would later simply be known as the Sandia Report. The Sandia researchers knew that their report would not be well received by education policymakers. An early version of the Sandia Report stated, "Unfortunately, much of the current reform agenda, though well-intentioned, is misguided." They went on to assert, based on a crisis mentality, many proposed reforms do not properly focus on actual problems. However, the researchers were also concerned that their report would be, at best, suppressed by the Department of Education and, at worst, their federal research funds would be cut as a result of the report's findings. Their concerns seem to have been well-founded. In an attempt to circumvent critics and ensure the accuracy of the report, the Sandia researchers began circulating annotated drafts to educators and researchers in late 1990, amidst rumors that the administration intended to kill the report. When the Sandia researchers first presented their report to the Department of Education in the spring of 1991, they were met with indignation. It has been reported that one Department of Education administrator told the researchers, "You bury this or I'll bury you." One journalist reported that the Sandia researchers were told that the report would never see the light of day and that they had better be quiet. Following the DOE hearings in 1991, DOE officials requested that the Sandia report undergo a review by the National Science Foundation and the National Center for Education Statistics. It has been suggested that while one of the goals of the extended evaluation was supposedly to judge the validity of the report's findings, extending the process helped neutralize its potential impact. Most telling is that in July 1991, the NCES, after evaluating the report, commented that it was rather unique in that it presented a balanced view of American education. In fact, Emerson Elliott, a member of the NCES, reflecting the views of this group, was rather complimentary when he stated, "I applaud the attempt represented here to present a balanced view of education, since that is frequently not the approach analysts take. This report presents both positive and negative aspects of the condition of education in the nation, and there are certainly trends that support both perspectives. This is an important aspect of the report, and balance should be sought throughout the revision process. In addition, the report covers a great deal of ground in attempting to address a full range of issues in education. This provides a comprehensive and intriguing compilation of information." The NCES did find that the report needed additional work before publication and dissemination to the public. However, according to Elliott, this additional work did not impact or invalidate the Sandia Report's findings and conclusions. The final version of the Sandia Report included a statement that the additional reviews would be included in the appendix. The Sandia researchers were confident that the appendix would, in fact, further strengthen the credibility of their report. And it was these findings and conclusions that were causing consternation among Department of Education officials and other critics of American public schools who had jumped on board the education reform wagon of a nation at risk. The Department of Education, under the George Herbert Walker Bush administration, never cleared the Sandia Report for publication. To date, the report has only been published in the Journal of Educational Research in its May June 1993 edition, which was devoted entirely to the Sandia Report. Although the researchers did not lose their jobs, they were reassigned, and the Sandia laboratories discontinued their proposed research and development program for education. It has been asserted that Sandia researchers were forbidden to leave the state of New Mexico to talk about the report. And while former Bush administrators to this day have continued to deny that the Sandia Report was suppressed, the Sandia vice president who oversaw the research after his retirement stated that it was definitely suppressed. So, what did the Sandia Report conclude that caused such angst among education policy makers, prompting them to go to such extraordinary lengths to suppress its findings? Well, with regard to SAT scores, Sandia researchers stated in their report that the much publicized decline in average SAT scores misrepresents the true story about SAT performance. Although it is true that the average SAT score has been declining since the 60s, the reason for the decline is not decreasing student performance. They went on to state that any decline in SAT scores was largely due to the fact that more people in America are aspiring to achieve a college education than ever before. So the national SAT average is lowered by the increased number of students in high school opting to take the SAT. This actually could be viewed in a positive light, since a college education was becoming more accessible to racially and ethnically diverse populations. Students from rural and urban communities have traditionally, and for a variety of reasons unrelated to schooling, performed less well on standardized tests. In fact, the report found that the average performance of a traditional test taker on the SAT had actually improved over 30 points since 1975. With regard to the National Assessment of Educational Progress, NAEP, Sandia researchers found that in the years leading up to 1990, there have not been recent declines in performance on skills tests. If anything, they stated, today's students are performing better than previous students. The researchers found that although the performance of minority students continues to lag behind white students, a large percentage of minority youth are staying in school and are achieving higher than their predecessors. According to Sandia researchers, we see this as a result of the education system's focus on increased access and improved basic skills. More specifically, they asserted that the NAEP data revealed that performance has been steady or improving in nearly every subject area tested, and the greatest gains have been made in basic skills. Furthermore, they said these gains have not been at the expense of advanced skills. With regard to the supposed increase in dropout rates, Sandia researchers found that calculating dropout rates before the mid-1980s was difficult because of a lack of any consistent measure across school districts. However, an extensive examination of census data revealed an impressive increase in graduation rates in the United States until the mid-1960s, and after 1965, the graduation rate from traditional schools had remained steady at about 75%. Furthermore, they found that if GED completion was included, the high school completion rate was over 85%. Sandia researchers also addressed the concern that there was a marked decline in college degrees in engineering, computer science, physical science, and mathematics. According to the Sandia Report, data from a National Science Foundation report shows that the percentage of 22-year-olds obtaining natural science and engineering bachelor's degrees was actually rather stable from 1960 to 1980 at nearly 4%. And furthermore, 1980s data indicate that youth today are choosing natural science and engineering degrees at a higher rate than their peers in the 1960s. The researchers further found that engineering PhDs are at or near an all-time high. And in fact, physical science PhDs are within a few percent of an all-time high. The authors of A Nation at Risk cited the lack of skilled workers available from the American schools as a significant problem. However, Sandia researchers asserted that although the lack of skilled workers is often advanced by business leaders as a major problem, only 15% of those surveyed had difficulty filling skilled positions. Furthermore, according to the report, even when the surveyed businesses complained about worker skills, they often alluded to work ethic and social skills, not academic skills. The researchers concluded the results of this survey suggest that the business leaders surveyed are generally satisfied with the skill levels of their employees, and the problems that do exist do not appear to point to the K-12 education system as a root cause. Well, clearly, findings such as these, especially coming from this highly respected, politically neutral group of scientific researchers at the Sandia National Laboratories, was something that needed to be tucked away in some inconspicuous place, like the Journal of Educational Research, where it would languish on the shelves of academic libraries, largely unread by the American public. With this report suppressed, the crusade would continue for the systemic reform of public schools in America.